Here is the text of the law enforcement oath of honor. On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve. The oath of honor reflects key values such as integrity, being truthful and honest in all actions; accountability, accepting responsibility for one's actions and holding others to the same standard; courage, standing up for what is right, even in difficult or dangerous situations; honor, maintaining the highest ethical standards and commitment to duty. It is a reminder of the personal and professional responsibility that law enforcement officers bear in their role to protect and serve the public.
There have been a lot of terms tonight that are blurry to a civilian, and having some clarity on them would be helpful. I don't know if they're in the report or not. In a town where 50% of our force lives here and additional officers grew up here, I think these terms need some clearer parameters for at least civilians, probably for the force as well. But you talked about recusal, discussion versus corruption. Discretion versus corruption, integrity, and then conflicts of interest. I didn't see perceived conflicts of interest, but that's potentially also something we need to consider, or impropriety. So, one, are these definitions net out anywhere where we can see that? Like, what defines integrity or discretion versus corruption, things like that? Where can we find the inside baseball language?
Okay, in terms of integrity, probably nowhere other than the dictionary. And I'm not being a smart aleck, but in terms of legal ramifications of recusal is when a person perceives that there's an outside influence that would prevent me from being objective. So it doesn't mean there's not an outside influence. It doesn't mean that I don't know somebody. It means my relationship with somebody would prevent me from being objective. If that's the case, then I would step back and say, I need to recuse myself, remove myself from this environment because I can't be objective. So that is a self-imposed in law enforcement. In rare circumstances, somebody from above may recuse somebody. Just say, hey, I don't want this. In one case, Candon Police Department. Then Chief Berkowitz said, we're going to recuse ourselves from this aspect. So that was dictated by the chief to the guys, yet it was self-imposed by the chief. Makes sense? It wasn't external where someone said, hey, you guys are out. And then discretion is every officer has discretion. So I have the ability to arrest or not to arrest. And in this environment, in a town community, with a police force that intimately knows the community, that's a very good thing. So garden variety, Joe has kids. They knocked over a garbage can. They stole Doritos. I show up, and I have the choice now. Do I arrest this kid and impact his career and give him a record or let him face charges? Or because I know his parents, and I know when I go speak to Mr. Joe Blow, this kid's going to get the tar beat out of him, and it'll never happen again, I have the discretion to go do that. Because there's a fine line. Do you want to ruin the life of every young adult because they've done something stupid? Now, it's a fine line. Do they do something serious? Then it is what it is. But that's what I talk about. So because I choose not to arrest this young man for shoplifting, the store owner, one, has to say, I'm not going to press charges. All right? So that's my victim. And he says, I don't want to press charges. I'm not going to do anything like that. I still now have that discretion. I'm going to take him to his parents. I'm going to let his parents discipline him because I know the family. They're a good family. The kid did something stupid, and I'm going to give him that chance. That's not corruption. That's discretion. It would be corruption if the guy wants to press charges, and I say, no, you don't want to do that. I talk him out of it. Or if I take the kid out and say, run, that's corruption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's blurry. It does, totally.
Well,
but I understand where it can get a little blurry.
It is
And that's
blurry.
where if you know somebody, the rules may be a little different for you.
Quite possibly, but if the department's documenting everything, then it's transparent because that contact I just described should still go on paper. So the fact that I take that route of discretion doesn't mean I don't document it. It doesn't mean I don't record that contact and I don't put on paper what my decision was. So it can be done without a sense of it's trying to be hidden.
So the second part of my question, because I think I still have time, is speaking to the recusal. Mm-hmm. If a local department has recused themselves because of a conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest in the instance of an unattended death,
yep.
Once MSP is on scene or taken over, apparently you don't really have to pass the baton, but if they've recused themselves, is it protocol for the perceived murder weapon to end up back in CPD custody, in chain of command back at CPD versus, say, at an MSP barracks?
And of course, the answer to that is if I recuse my whole department, no. But what was done is there was supposed to be a recusal as it related to the in-depth interviews. Now I'm letting them use my facility. So, that's a hair split that everyone's going to have an opinion on, which is why our recommendation is don't recuse yourself. You're a police department. You're a professional police department. Do your job. If you have officers that you don't feel have the ability to do their job without recusing themselves all the time, then there's a bigger problem.
Question. Oh goodness, the homeowner's gonna get some shit for this. Answer, nope. Next text, he's a Boston cop too. That doesn't sound like an explanation for your nope.
The definition of gift excludes opportunities and benefits, including favorable rates and commercial discounts available to the public at large.
I did look at the next page.
And?
I work next door to the Oval Office, sir. Caesar's wife must be above reproach.
So, the phrase has come to mean that someone in a position of power must ensure that their close associates, particularly their spouse, are free from any actions or associations that could bring doubt or disrepute to their leadership or status. It's often used to suggest that even the slightest suspicion or appearance of wrongdoing is enough to cause harm to a person in a position of authority.
I took advantage. When I was 17, I got stopped for a speeding ticket. The officer looked at my driver's license and said, "Oh, you're Roger Searle's daughter. Turn around, go back, and come back at the right speed." That was good. But the next kid who came down that street where the officer didn't know them may not have gotten the same break. And so my question about discretion isn't about any campaign, about any of the comments that have been made about that, but it's more about equity and how we make sure that our residents are treated in an equitable way, because, we have a limited number of officers. They're not going to know the parents of every kid who gets caught at, seasons, maybe lifting a candy bar. And so how do we make sure that that we have an equitable approach when we think about discretion with members of our community?
Sure.
And I think that's where I struggle when you talk about discretion and having so much of that be based on, the officer knows the family. They know that when that kid goes home, they're going to get, dealt with in the family, and it's going to be handled. So could you talk more about that? Because I think
Yes.
that's a really important issue in our community today.
Yes, you just provided my answer in that discretion's not me throwing a dart at a wall saying, do I feel like arresting him or do I not? It's a decision I make, a conscious decision based on what I know about this person. So if I don't know what family they come from and I don't know their parents and I don't know how they're raised, I might not use discretion. I'm going to use discretion as an officer when I think it's in the best interest of the citizen. The more I know about that individual, the better, which is why we emphasize don't lose your community police force. I understand you have issues with it, and they can be worked out, especially in any forum where there's direct communication. But when you take the discretion away from an officer, now every person that gets pulled over for everything gets a ticket, regardless of who they are, how many, you don't want to take the discretion away from an officer. But just understand, when I say discretion, it's not a random choice. It's not like, yeah, I'm just going to use my discretion and let this guy go. My decision should be based on a series of facts that, when stated, are in the best interest of the citizen. And even though I don't execute the arrest through discretion based on facts that benefit the civilian, I should record that police contact. So there should be a report of that with my decision not to arrest. And that goes back to, well, I don't know if it was Ms. Lombardi or the other lady that spoke about integrity, and that's what it's about. You have officers that are willing to do that. They're not hiding from their decisions, but you make a decision, much like our report. I understand not everyone likes our report. And people say, oh, we're soft. We weren't brought here to kill anybody. We were brought here to assess policies and its application and recommend improvements. And where we found it, we recommended it. Where we didn't, as it was asked for, we didn't, and we said what was doing well. But an officer's discretion is based on a variety of justifiable, articulable facts that should go into a report. Does that make sense?
It does, and I guess and I like that discretion is important. What I hear you saying that I think is also equally important is when discretion is used, that it's also reported and documented so that there's some transparency about that.
Right.
I think I heard that. And
Yes,
then I just think we have to be cautious to make sure, because our officers can only know so many people in our community, and that leaves a lot of people potentially more vulnerable because they don't have those connections and relationships, and that
Sure.
discretion may not get applied equally. And this isn't about campaign, it's more about equity, and we have a lot of newcomers, people who I've been here over 30 years, but we have people in our community who've been here, a year or 2 years, and they may not have those same connections and relationships.
And you looked at the jurors, paused, and said, I never asked for a gift. I never received a gift. Elizabeth never asked for a gift. She never received a gift. Remember that?
Correct.
You said you never asked for a gift, correct?
Correct.
What's your next text?
Get Elizabeth one.
Get Elizabeth one what?
Referring to a gift.
Right. So you did, in fact, ask for a gift, didn't you?
For my wife, who had been home with my children for the last 10 nights.
From Julie Albert
Yes.
for your participation on this case.
I don't know if that's yes.
Well, Courtney Proctor answers that question by saying, because I guess her and Chris were friends and John, and she's so proud of you for leading this investigation, correct?
Correct.